Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive? Always.
Right.
Awesome. Today we're going to tackle something pretty big, actually. Hispanic immigration to the U.S. post-World War II, so like 1945 onward.
A lot to unpack there.
Yeah. We're using this, well, it's a lecture transcript, actually, from Mr. Hutchings History. Ever heard of it?
Rings a bell. High school, maybe?
Yeah, maybe. But got the sense, the stuff he covers, it's not your typical textbook dry stuff.
Oh.
It goes into like cultural clashes, legal battles, even...
Wait, is there a soccer rivalry in there somewhere?
You'll have to wait and see. But yeah, it gets pretty intense.
I'm intrigued.
Good. So first things first, when we say Hispanic, just so everyone's on the same page, we're talking...
Folks with roots in Spanish-speaking countries, right?
Exactly. Mostly Latin America for our purposes today. Now, buckle up because this deep dive gets twisty.
Hit me with it.
All right, so picture this. 1974, less than 1% of U.S. radio stations played anything in Spanish.
Wow.
Fast forward to 2000, that number's more than tripled.
That's a huge jump.
Yeah.
Speaks volumes about how the cultural landscape was changing.
Right. Talk about a cultural earthquake. And as you can imagine, that kind of shift brought up a lot of, well...
Anxieties.
Yeah. The transcript goes into this whole thing about crime and, you know, that age-old question of what it means to...
Assimilate. To become American.
Exactly. It's a loaded topic, for sure.
Understatement.
Okay, so let's get into this crime and immigration connection. It's tricky, right? Because it's so easy to just...
Assume they go hand in hand.
Yeah. And sadly, history often, well, it feeds that fire.
No shortage of examples, unfortunately.
One that jumped out in the lecture was about Westlake, Los Angeles, back in the 80s.
I've heard of it. Rough neighborhood, right?
Really struggling, poverty, overcrowding, gangs were on the rise.
Easy to see how that becomes a target for blame.
Right, but what Mr. Hutchings does, which I thought was cool, is he asks, was it the immigrants causing the problems or was it the...
The situation they were stuck in.
Yeah,
Huh.
It's like blaming a plant for wilting when it's planted in bad soil.
Yeah. Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
So often we miss the context.
Right. Now, fast forward to 2008, totally different time, obviously, but there's this stat, over 110,000 illegal immigrants deported.
Majority being Hispanic American.
Yep. And they had criminal convictions. So on the surface, that looks bad, right?
It's easy to draw a conclusion from that.
But then the transcript gets into this whole thing about, like, how different communities are policed differently.
How the justice system itself might be biased.
And you know that saying, there are lies, damned lies, and statistics. You can make numbers say anything.
Out of context.
Totally. So it's like, were immigrants actually more likely to commit crimes?
Or just more likely to get caught in the system.
Exactly. It's a much bigger discussion about, well, about racial disparities, really.
Conversation we need to have for sure.
And it makes you think, right, about what's happening in your own city.
Yeah, assumptions we might have.
Because it's easy to just go with the headlines.
And miss the nuance.
Exactly. So this whole thing about crime, it kind of leads into the whole debate about assimilation, which was, well...
It was raging back then.
Oh, yeah. Like a Rubik's Cube with a million moving pieces. You've got language barriers, cultural differences, economic anxieties. It's a lot.
Mr. Hutchings mentions Pat Buchanan in there.
Oh, right. And that whole thing about ethnic militancy, remember that?
94, I think it was.
Something like that. It sounds kind of scary, to be honest.
Well, the idea was that American culture was under threat.
From these incoming cultures.
It's definitely loaded language. Implies aggression, refusal to integrate.
Even like an uprising? Is that what he was getting at?
Well, he even compared Southern California to, get this, Quebec.
Whoa, seriously. Quebec was trying to like secede from Canada.
Yeah. So it's like he's saying Hispanic immigrants are not just different, but like a danger to America itself.
Wow. Okay, that's a pretty strong statement. So it's like this fear of the, what is it?
The other.
Right, the other taking over, changing things too much.
And that brings us to another battleground. Language.
Oh, right. California's English-only movement.
Prop 63, 1986. English became the official language of the state.
Some people saw it as like a practical thing promoting unity.
Others saw it as a way to, well, to push back against Spanish.
It makes you wonder, right, was it really about practicality or was it about...
Fear.
Yeah. It was a big deal back then, that whole language war.
Huge. And then there's the impact on education. The Lau v. Nichols case in 74 said bilingual ed was needed.
To help students learn.
Exactly. But then, just a couple decades later, California passes Prop 227, basically banning bilingual education.
Wait, so first they say it's needed, then it's banned. What happened?
That's the million-dollar question. Part of it was definitely those same anxieties we talked about, fear of the culture fragmenting.
Pressure to assimilate.
And this idea that speaking English is like the key to being American.
It's crazy how much these debates are all connected to this bigger question of
Identity.
belonging. Who's in, who's out. And you know what's wild? This isn't just history. It's still happening.
In schools, in communities, everywhere.
Think about your own local schools, right? Are they places where different languages are celebrated? Or is it like this
Pressure cooker.
to conform, to lose a part of yourself?
Big questions for sure. It's a constant tension, right?
Yeah.
Trying to find that balance between being welcoming and
worrying about losing what it means to be American.
yeah, exactly. And one thing that always comes up when we talk about immigration, almost like it's
Essential to the American identity.
yeah, maybe. But I was gonna say, it's like the elephant in the room. It's
The economy.
you got it. Money talks, right?
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to immigration.
Oh, for sure. And there are so many assumptions and stereotypes out there.
There's tons. Like when Mr. Hutchings brought up the argument that immigrants hurt the economy.
They steal jobs, lower wages, all that stuff.
Right. But he makes a good point. He says, you got to look at it historically, too.
Like, sometimes they actually helped the economy, right?
Filled labor shortages, boosted industries,
Yeah.
even created whole new markets. It's not so black and white.
Definitely not. It's got to depend on so many things, the type of work, what the economy is like at the time.
The immigrants' skills and education.
Right. It's not like every immigrant is the same, right? That's ridiculous.
Absolutely. And here's a curveball from the lecture. The Gallup poll from 2000
Okay.
found that most Americans thought immigrants were good for the economy.
Wait, seriously, that doesn't seem to match up with all the negative stuff you hear.
Right. So why the disconnect? Mr. Hutchings suggests it might be because of politics, media.
Spinning the story a certain way.
Yeah. Sometimes fear is more powerful than facts, even when it comes to economics.
Oh, that's so true. Okay, but speaking of money going places, remember that $7 billion figure Mr. Hutchings mentioned?
The money sent back to Mexico in 2001.
Yeah.
Huge amount.
Is that like hurting the U.S. economy? Or is it helping families in Mexico?
It's a great question. Makes you think about how economies are all, like, linked together.
Globalization and all that.
Exactly. And it's not just about the money. It's about the people, the families, the connections.
Right, the cultural connections, too. Speaking of which, remember that U.S. versus Mexico soccer game Mr. Hutchings talked about?
1998, the one with the let's just say it wasn't the most sportsmanlike behavior.
Booze during the anthem, trash on the field, yikes. Not exactly friendly competition.
It became the symbol, right, of the tensions that were bubbling under the surface.
Deeper than just a soccer game.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it ties into what historian Arthur Schlesinger Jr. was worried about multiculturalism.
Like, would it divide America?
Yeah, would it break us apart? If a soccer game could cause that much anger, what about
Deeper cultural differences.
Exactly. It gets at this struggle we have, right? America's supposed to be a melting pot.
But then when people express their culture in ways we're not used to, it's like,
It makes us uncomfortable.
totally. And we see it all the time today, too, right? Debates about religion, language.
Even music.
Yeah. It's like, where's the line between celebrating diversity and worrying about losing our...
Our identity as Americans.
Yeah. So back to assimilation. Mr. Hutchings mentions that in the 90s, a lot more Hispanic Americans.
Started trying to become citizens.
Which seems like a good thing, right? Like, it's working.
It would seem so, yeah.
But then he talks about the 1996 Welfare Reform Act, which made it harder for...
Non-citizens to get benefits,
Right.
even if they were legal residents.
Really? And then Congress made it easier to deport people.
Even legal immigrants for minor crimes.
So you're telling me they're encouraging people to become citizens,
But then punishing them for past mistakes.
even if those mistakes weren't even illegal anymore. It's like saying,
Come on in, but watch your step.
it's so confusing. Talk
Yeah.
about mixed messages.
Right, and this is all happening as the Hispanic American population is booming.
Changing the face of America.
It was a real identity crisis for the country.
Figuring out who we are, what we stand for, in the face of all this change. It's like, wow, America was really going through some growing pains back then.
You could say that again. Big time.
So where does all this leave us? What are the key takeaways from this whole deep dive?
Well, one thing that really sticks out from the lecture is that immigration, it's never just about, well,
Just about people moving, right?
right, it's a window into like all these other parts of a country.
The economy, culture, values.
Even its own identity. Like, what does it even mean to be American?
Which that seems to be at the heart of so much of the tension.
Oh, absolutely. Everyone's got their own idea what it means to be American, and those ideas, well,
They clash.
yeah. The lecture does a good job of showing just how complicated it all is.
There are no easy answers.
Not at all. But it makes you think about how immigration, crime, assimilation, language, even the economy.
They're all tangled up together.
Big time. And at the bottom of it all, it's about belonging.
Who's in, who's out.
Exactly. It's a very human story,
Yeah.
really.
It's also kind of crazy how much history repeats itself.
Isn't it? The same fears, the same anxieties about change, about who we are as a nation.
It's like we haven't really learned from the past.
Or maybe we're just doomed to keep having the same arguments over and over again.
Maybe. But hey, that's why doing these deep dives is so important, right?
Totally. Helps us understand the issues better, you know?
See things from different perspectives.
And hopefully have better conversations about all this stuff.
Because it's not going away anytime soon.
Definitely not. Immigration is part of the American story. Always has been.
True that. So last question for you and for everyone listening. If you were in charge of immigration policy today.
Oh boy, that's a big one.
I know, right? But seriously, what would be your top priorities? How would you balance keeping the country safe with...
With being welcoming and fair.
Exactly. It's such a tough balance.
No easy answers, that's for sure. But I think it starts with, well, with empathy.
Trying to understand where people are coming from.
And remembering the lessons we've learned, or at least the lessons we should have learned from the past.
So well said. And on that note, a huge thank you to you for joining us on this deep dive.
Always a pleasure.
We hope you learned something new, maybe challenge some of your own assumptions.
And most importantly, that you keep thinking about these issues.
Because they matter. So until next time, keep diving deep, everyone.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.